Under her husband's bed was a locked iron box, and inside it was the truth he never believed she would dare to touch. Naomi had been made small for 2 years, but one night in the dark, she took back more than papers. She took back her name, her voice, and her future. The meaning is simple. Freedom is not handed to you, you choose to stand. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt Western stories.
The road into Redemption Creek ran straight for a mile, then bent at the old cottonwood. Eli Calhoun had ridden it since dawn. He was tired in the way a man gets when the tiredness lives in his bones and not his legs. He wanted coffee. He wanted a roof. He wanted, mostly, to be somewhere that asked nothing of him. Then he heard the sound. It carried across the dry flat the way sound does in open country. A crack, flat and hard. He knew it before he saw it. He'd heard it before, a long time ago, in a house he no longer let himself walk through in his mind. He reined the horse to a walk. The ranch sat off to the right, small, tidy in the way that fear makes a place tidy. A woman was down in the yard, on her hands and knees in the dirt. A man stood over her, with his hat still on his head. Eli sat his horse and watched. He wanted to move. His whole body wanted to move. But he had learned something the hard way, years back, and the lesson had cost more than he could say. He had learned that a man who rushes in, without seeing clear, sometimes makes a thing worse. He had charged once. He had been too late, and too loud, and it had not saved anybody. So now he looked first. He made himself look. The woman tried to rise. The man said something Eli couldn't hear. Then his hand came up again. That was enough. Eli swung down from the saddle. Easy, unhurried. He looped the reins over the fence post, the way he'd done 10,000 times, until it stopped being a thing he thought about. Then he walked into the yard. Afternoon, he said. The man turned. He was big through the shoulders. Clean shirt, a banker's softness in the hands, and a meanness in the mouth. He looked at Eli the way men like him always looked at strangers. Like the road belonged to him, and Eli was standing on it. "This is private land," the man said. I figured. Then you can move along. Eli didn't move along. He looked at the woman, just for a second. Her hands were bleeding where the gravel had bit them. There was a mark coming up along her cheek, dark already. But it was her eyes that stopped him. She wasn't looking at the man. She was looking at the dirt, holding still, the way a person holds still when stillness is the only thing that's ever kept them safe. Too, he'd seen it on a face he loved once, and had told himself it was nothing. She fell, the man said. Smooth now, reasonable. Clumsy woman. Caught her foot. That's so, that's so. Eli nodded slow. He looked at the man's hand, then at the woman's face, then back. Funny thing about falling, Eli said. A person falls forward when they trip, hands out front. She's got dirt on the side of her head. The man's jaw tightened. You some kind of lawman? Not anymore, Eli said. Used to be. He took a step closer. Not fast. The man's hand twitched toward his hip, then stopped, because there was nothing on his hip but a belt. That told Eli plenty. This was a man used to a kind of power that didn't need a gun, the kind that worked behind closed doors, on people who couldn't hit back. She's my wife, the man said, like that settled it, like it was a wall he could put up between himself and everything. And there it was, the oldest excuse in the world. Eli stopped walking. He stood maybe 6 feet off, close enough to be heard, far enough to give the woman room. Because if he came at her too quick, she'd flinch from him, same as from anybody. And she'd earned better than that. I knew a man once said the same words, Eli said. His voice came out quiet. Said she's my wife like it was the end of the conversation. Like a ring on a finger made a person into property. He shook his head. It doesn't. A wife isn't a horse. She doesn't go where you point her. And she sure as hell isn't yours to put in the dirt. The yard went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold off. You don't know anything about it. The man said, I know what I'm looking at. You don't know this county. You don't know who I am. No, Eli agreed. Easy as anything. But I know that a man who'll do this in his own yard, in broad daylight, where God in the road can see him. He let it sit beat, does a sight worse, behind a closed door. The man's face changed then. The reasonable part fell off it. What was underneath was colder. Get back on your horse. Mr. Eli looked past him, down at the woman. Ma'am, he said. Gentle, can you stand? She lifted her head. First time. She looked at him like he was something she didn't have a name for. A stranger who'd stopped. Men didn't stop. She knew that much about the world. They saw and they rode on. And they told themselves it wasn't their business. I can stand, she said. Her voice was small, but it was steady. Then stand, Eli said, on your own feet. Nobody pulls you up. Nobody pushes you down. You decide. And he didn't reach for her. That was the thing. He could have. It would have looked kind. But kind isn't the same as right. So he stayed where he was. And he let her do it herself. She got one foot under her, then the other. She did not fall. The man watched her rise. And Eli watched the man. And somewhere in the rising, the whole shape of the afternoon began to turn. This isn't finished, the man said. Eli looked at him a long moment, the way you look at something to fix it in your memory. No, he said, it's just getting started. Silent Vance rode off toward town a little before 3. Naomi watched him go from the porch step. She didn't watch the way a wife watches a husband. She watched the way you watch weather. You track it. You learn its habits. You note which way it's moving and how fast. So you know what's coming and when. He pointed the horse at the Redemption Creek Road. He didn't look back. That was the dangerous part. She'd learned. The looking back meant he was still talking to you in his head. The not looking back meant he'd already decided something. And you wouldn't know what until later. She listened to the hooves fade. Then she sat down on the step. Her legs just gave out under her. Slow, like a building settling. And she counted. 1. It was a thing she'd started in the first year. She gave herself 60 seconds to feel whatever wanted feeling. A full minute, no more. Because if she let it run past that, it spread. It got into her hands and her chest, and it made her useless. And useless was not a thing she could afford to be. Useless got you hurt worse. So 60 seconds. Her palms stung where the gravel had opened them. The side of her head throbbed in time with her heart. She pressed the heel of her good hand against the worst of it and breathed. 15, 16. The stranger was gone. He'd watered his horse at her trough, tipped his hat, and ridden off the same direction. Silas hadn't gone. North. She'd half expected him to make some kind of promise. Men did that. They said, don't you worry now? And then they rode away, and the worry came right back. Bigger than before. Because now there was a witness. And Silas didn't like witnesses. But the stranger hadn't promised her anything. He just told her to stand up on her own feet. She didn't know what to do with that. 41. She thought about his face. Lean, weathered, a scar at the chin. Eyes the color of creek water in shadow. He'd looked at her arm before he'd looked at her face. And he'd kept his distance even when she'd nearly gone over. And some part of her had understood, dimly, that the distance was a kindness, that he'd read her, that he'd known if he'd lunged to catch her, she'd have shied away like a beaten dog. And he hadn't wanted to make her do that in front of the man who'd put her down. Most people didn't think that far. Most people helped in the way that made themselves feel better. 58, 59, 60. She got up. There was a fire to build, and beans to start, and a face to fix into something Silas could live with when he came home smelling of other men's whiskey. She went inside and did it. Her hands knew the work. Her mind went somewhere quieter, the way it had learned to. He came back at dusk. Not Silas. The stranger. She heard the horse, and her whole body locked. Then she saw it wasn't Silas's bay. It was a dark gelding, and a man sitting it easy. And she stood in the doorway with the lamp behind her and didn't say anything. He stopped at the edge of the yard. He didn't come in. Didn't mean to startle you, he said. Saw the lamp. Figured I'd ask before I rode off and slept on it. He paused. Those hands need cleaning. I've got something in my bag that'll keep them from going bad. She didn't answer right away. He's not here, she said finally, like a warning, like a fact he ought to weigh. I know, the man said. I waited up the road till he passed me going the other way. Town, I'd guess. Saloon, she said. He nodded, like that lined up with what he'd figured. He swung down, slow, and stayed by the horse, and held up a small brown bottle so she could see it. You can do it yourself, he said. I'll just leave it on the post. That was the second time he'd done it. Handed her the thing instead of the help. She came down off the porch. 2 steps. She stopped an arm's length from him, which was as close as she'd come to a strange man in 2 years on purpose. Why'd you stop? She said, this afternoon. On the road. He thought about it. She noticed he thought about it. He didn't just reach for the easy thing. Had a sister, he said. When I was young, our mother had a husband before our father. I was too small to know what I was seeing. By the time I was big enough to know, it had a name. And the name was the same one I saw in your yard today. He looked off down the dark road. And then my sister married a man. And I knew. And I told myself the law would handle it. I told myself it wasn't my place. He stopped. It didn't handle it. And by the time I made it my place, I was burying her. The wind moved between them. So when you ask why I stopped, he said, the honest answer is, I've spent a lot of years thinking about a road I didn't go down. This one I could. Naomi held very still. You don't even know my name? She said, no, ma'am, I don't. It's Naomi. It came out before she'd decided to give it. Naomi Vance. He took the name and set it down somewhere careful. The way a man sets down something he intends to keep. Eli Calhoun, he said. I'll be at the way station up the road a day or two. Hester runs it. He set the bottle on the post. That's all. I'm not asking you for a thing. He got back on the horse. Mr. Calhoun, he waited. He says the law lets him, she said. It came out flat. She wasn't arguing. She was telling him how the world was, in case he didn't know. He says I'm his wife and the law's on his side. And he's right. It is. So I don't know what good a clean hand does me. Eli was quiet a moment. When he spoke, his voice didn't rise. It just got very even. The law lets a man do a lot of things, Naomi. The law let men own other men. In this country. Not so long ago. The law called it legal, right up until it called it a crime. That didn't make it right for one single day in between. He looked at her square. A thing being allowed and a thing being just are 2 different animals. Don't ever let a man teach you they're the same. You were a person before you were anybody's wife. You'll be one after. The wife parts a contract. The person parts the whole of you. And no contract ever signed touches it. She stood in the lamplight and felt those words go into her somewhere she hadn't been reached in a long time. "All right," she said. Just that. He touched his hat and rode. She took the bottle inside. She cleaned her hands at the basin, hissing through her teeth where the brown liquid bit. Then she wrapped the worst cut with a strip of clean cloth, and she did it well, and quick, and tight in the right places, because her mother had taught her that before she'd taught her anything else. "You've got healing hands, Naomi," her mother used to say. "Don't waste them being afraid." She looked at the wrap. It was good work. Steady work. For 1 second, just one. She didn't give it 60. She let herself wonder what those hands might do if they weren't busy patching themselves back together all the time. Then she put the lamp out, and she lay down in the dark, and she waited for the sound of a horse. That meant the night was going to get worse. It didn't come till near morning, and when it did, she was ready, the way she was always ready. But something was different now. She couldn't have said what. It was small. It was almost nothing. It was the size of a clean hand and 2 words. "Stand up." Silas found out about the stranger by noon the next day. She knew the moment he came through the door with his hat on. He always took his hat off in the house. Always. Not from manners, from habit. The way a man does a thing so long it does itself. So when he left it on, it meant something had knocked his habits loose. And only one thing ever did that. "Who was he?" Silas said. "A test." "Who was who?" "The man in my yard. Yesterday." He set his hands flat on the table. "Don't make me ask twice." Naomi, she'd had the night to think. She'd decided on the truth. Mostly because Silas could always smell a lie, and the lie cost more than it bought. "A rider," she said. "He watered his horse and went on." He watered his horse. Silas said it slow, turning it over. "Alma Betts saw a man stop a good while. Saw a man come back after dark." Of course she had. Alma saw everything from her kitchen window and told it to whoever sat still long enough. "He left a bottle for my hands," Naomi said. "That's all." "Your hands." Silas looked at the wrap on her arm like it was a thing she'd done to spite him. "Now I've got men leaving you gifts. You know how that looks. You know what that does to a man standing. I didn't ask him to stop. Silas, didn't you?" And there it was. The turn. She saw it come the way she saw weather come. And her body started getting ready before her mind caught up. Her shoulders rising. Her weight shifting back toward the wall where there was something solid behind her. He came around the table. But this time her feet didn't wait for permission. She went out the door. She didn't decide it. Some animal part of her, some part that had been crouched and waiting 14 months, made the choice, and her body just followed. She was off the porch and into the yard and running, really running, her heart slamming in her ears. And behind her, Silas was shouting, and his voice was getting smaller. And for one wild, bright second, she thought his hand closed on her arm. He'd come off the porch faster than she'd figured. He always did. She could never account for how fast a furious man moved. He spun her. She went down on one knee in the dirt. His grip ground the bones in her forearm together, and a sound came out of her. She couldn't stop. And then, from the road, a horse, walking, unhurried. Silas went still, not letting go, but his attention turned, the way a dog turns at a noise past the fence. Eli Calhoun sat his horse at the edge of the yard, one hand loose on the reins. He didn't look like he'd hurried. He looked like a man who'd happened to be on a road that happened to go past. "Let her go," he said. No threat hung on it, just the 2 words. Flat as a stone laid on a table. Silas laughed. "Short and ugly. You again. You got a death wish. Mister, let her go." Same words. Same tone. like he had all day and meant to spend it here. Silas's grip tightened, and Naomi gasped. And Eli's jaw set the only thing in his whole body that moved. Last chance to ride on, Silas said. No, Eli said. It happened fast after that. Silas let her go and went for the stranger. Naomi scrambled back on her hands and watched. Her husband was big, and he'd been in fights, and he came forward the way he always did, sure of his own size. Eli didn't meet the rush. He stepped inside it, got one hand on Silas's wrist and one on his collar, and used the man's own weight against him, and put him into the fence post. Not cruel, not even hard. Exactly, just exact. The way a man moves who knows where a body's hinges are. Silas hit the post and went to his knees in the dirt, one hand to his mouth, making a sound she'd never heard him make. Small, stunned. A sound with no threat left in it at all. Eli stepped back. He didn't crow over it. He just looked down. Stay there, a minute. I want a word with the lady. He turned to Naomi. He didn't come close. He gave her the room. Same as before. You hurt my arm, she said. Can you stand? She could. She did. He watched her do it and didn't move to help. And she understood by now that the not helping was a kind of respect she'd nearly forgotten existed. Then she heard it, off down the Redemption Creek road. Hoofbeats, more than one. She knew before she could see. He talks fast, she said, faster than you'd think. He'll have told men at the saloon a stranger put him on his knees. And men like that, she looked at Eli, they don't need the law. They need 3 drunks who owe them a favor. Eli's face didn't change, but something behind it shifted. She could feel it. How many can he call on? 3 for certain. Could be more, by how the story's told. Silas tells good story. Then we don't wait to find out. He looked at her, and the next thing he said like it was an honest question and not an order. You know this country. I don't, so you tell me. Where do we go? Nobody had asked her that in 2 years. Not where he wanted to go. Where she knew to go. North, she said. The old Hadley place. Empty since spring. Silas won't think of it. He feuded with Cal Hadley over a fence line and never went near the property after. She was already moving. There's a back way in, through the dry creek bed. I know it. He doesn't. How long on horseback? Cross country. 8 minutes. They'll take the road. We've got a little. He held a hand down to her. Behind me. Can you ride? She looked at the road, at the dust rising on it. She thought about every careful penny she'd saved and every careful word she'd swallowed, and every Sunday the pastor told her to be patient. Yes, she said. She got up behind him and put her arms around his waist. And they rode. They cut north for the cottonwood. And the dust on the road behind them rose and chased. She turned her face against his shoulder, and against the wind, she said. How many? 3 horses. Maybe 4. He didn't turn around. They're not gaining much. This horse has legs. Boyd Crease has a gray. He said nothing. But she felt him shift his weight, just slightly, and the gelding lengthened its stride. And she pressed in close and made herself small, because she was the second rider. And the second rider cost speed, and she knew it, and so did he. The cottonwood came up gray and huge in the afternoon light, and he took the turn north without slowing, and she leaned into it with him, and ground percentage under the hooves. Then a shout behind them, too far for words, close enough for meaning. They saw us turn, she said. Yeah, the dry creek. East side. It comes up behind the Hadley barn. There's a way down most folks don't know. She kept her mouth near his ear. Cal Hadley's daughter showed me when we were girls. She thought it was a secret, a game. A beat. How far out of our way? Quarter mile. Tell me where. And she did. And he went. He didn't argue. Didn't second guess. Didn't decide he knew the land better than the woman who'd run it as a child. He just trusted what she said and rode where she pointed. And she felt something turn over in her chest that she didn't have a word for yet. It wasn't the running. She'd run before. In her mind. 1,000 times. It was being asked. It was being followed. It was a man with a gun on his hip and a steady hand on the reins saying, "You know this country," and meaning every word of it. The creek bed opened ahead, dry and pale in the falling light. He took them down into it careful, and somewhere behind them, the pursuit went straight on north up the road, the wrong way, toward the front of a place they'd be coming at from the back. For the first time in 2 years, Naomi Vance was the one who knew the way, and somebody was letting her lead it. They came up behind the Hadley barn the way Naomi remembered it. Her body knew the lean of the ground before her eyes confirmed it. That was the thing about a place you learned as a child. It lives in you, in your hands and your feet, and the way you know to step. They waited there, in the dark of the barn, while the riders went up the road and milled at the front and called to each other, in voices that didn't quite carry. Then the voices moved off, confused and faded. Silas's men had ridden to the front of an empty house and found nobody, and they hadn't thought to look at the back, because Silas had told them where to go, and Silas didn't know. Later, when the night was full and the road was quiet, they rode west. The Hadley horse Naomi had taken from the boy. There'd be a reckoning for that someday, she figured, but not tonight moved easy under her. She rode her own mount now, her own reins in her own hands, beside Eli, not behind him. She noticed the difference. She made herself notice it. She'd spent 2 years noticing the bad things so they wouldn't catch her off guard. She was going to have to learn notice the good ones, too, or she'd ride right past them. Mercy Station was a light in a window, and the smell of wood smoke before they ever saw the building. A door opened before they dismounted. A woman stood in it with a lamp held high. Small, straight-backed, gray hair pinned tight. Somewhere past 60, in the way that women who've worked hard their whole lives get to be an age range, not a number. "Calhoun," the woman said. "Hester." She held the lamp toward Naomi. She looked at the wrapped arm. She looked at the mark on the side of Naomi's head, and the state of her dress, and the fact that she'd come in the dark on a horse that plainly wasn't hers. And Hester Mills asked not one single question about any of it. "Come in out of the cold. Horses go in the south stalls. Water's already up." The main room was low and warm and smelled of coffee and harness leather, and the particular layered smell of a place that has held a great many strangers and judged none of them. A stove, a long table, a shelf of supplies, a curtain over the doorway to the back. Hester went to a trunk in the corner and came back with linen and a small dark bottle and a tin of salve that smelled of something sharp and green. "Sit," she said to Naomi. "Let me see it." Naomi sat. She put her arm on the table. Hester took it the way a person takes a thing she's handled 1,000 times. She felt along the bone with hard, sure fingers. "You were a nurse," Naomi said. It wasn't a guess. "War," Hester said. "Long time back. Wrapped more broken arms than most doctors I've met since." She pressed, and Naomi set her jaw, and Hester nodded. "Not broke. Cracked, maybe. One of the thin ones. Bruised down deep. You'll keep it." She started wrapping, tight in the right places. "The first time. I can see where. My mother taught me. Good hands." Hester pinned the wrap. "Don't waste them." Naomi went still. Those were near enough her mother's own words that for a second she couldn't speak. Across the room, Eli washed up at the basin with his back to them, giving her the room to be tended without his face in it. She was keeping a list, she realized, a list of the right things he did. It was getting long. They ate stew at the long table. Hester didn't pry. But somewhere in the warm and the quiet, Eli set down his spoon and talked. And Naomi understood he was doing it on purpose, giving her something of himself, so the giving wouldn't run all one direction. I told you about my sister, he said. I didn't tell you all of it. Naomi waited. After she married him, I knew what kind of man he was. Knew it in my gut, but I'd just pinned on the badge. And I had the law in my head, like scripture. I thought there's a way these things are done. There's courts. There's process. You don't just ride up to a man's house and take a woman out of it. That's not how a lawful man behaves. He turned his cup slow on the table. So I waited for it to be done right. I waited on the law. The fire popped. She died waiting, he said. And I learned a thing I've never been able to set down since. He looked up. And he looked at Naomi when he said it. Plain and direct. Kindness that won't act isn't kindness. It's just a nicer name for looking away. A man who sees a wrong and does nothing because doing something is hard or unmannerly or against the rules that man isn't innocent. He's just a quieter kind of guilty. Nobody said anything for a moment. That's a hard thing to carry, Naomi said finally. It is, but carrying it's the only honest thing I can do with it now. He took a breath. I don't stop on roads because I'm good. Naomi, I stop because I know exactly what it costs not to. Hester had gone quiet at the end of the table, listening. Now she spoke, and her voice was dry and even. You men think you invented seeing it. She wasn't unkind about it. Just true. I nursed a whole war full of boys who got medals for the bravery of running at cannon. Not one medal in this whole country for the woman who runs at nothing every day in her own kitchen with no gun and no horse and nowhere to go. She looked at Naomi. You ran today, on foot, in your house shoes, at a man twice your size, with no plan but out. There's not a soldier alive braver than that. Naomi looked down at her hands. It didn't feel brave. It felt like fear. Of course it did. Hester reached over and tapped the table once, near Naomi's wrapped arm. Brave isn't the absence of fear. Child, brave is the fear plus the feet still moving. Anybody tells you different. Never had anything real to be afraid of. Naomi sat with that. It went into her the way Eli's words about the law had gone in the night before, to a place that had been hungry a long time, without her knowing what for. She'd been told she was foolish, difficult, ungrateful, asking for it. 2 years of being handed names for herself, all of them small. And here in one warm room, too near, strangers had handed her two she'd never been given. Brave and good hands. She held on to them. Hard. That night she lay in the back room and didn't sleep. Not from fear. For once. From something turning over. She thought about Silas. About the cabin 2 miles from the nearest soul, a distance he'd called peace and opportunity. And she'd believed him. Because she'd been 18, and her father's farm had gone under, and her mother had said the man had prospects. She understood now that the distance had never been peace. The distance was the point. A man can only do what Silas did to a woman who has nobody close enough to hear. His whole power was built on her being alone, on no name worth using, and no family left to wire, and no neighbor near enough to come running. And now she was in a warm room with a roof full of other people's voices. And the loneliness that had been her whole climate for 2 years had a crack in it. She didn't name what she felt. She'd learned not to name things before they were solid. But she felt it. The very first loosening of a knot, she'd stopped believing anyone's hands could reach. Morning came gray and cold. Hester had coffee on before the sky was full light. The two card-playing strangers from the night before had gone out to the stage, and it was just the three of them at the table. And Hester poured and sat down and got to the thing she'd plainly been chewing on. Vance, she said. I know that name. Naomi's hand went tight on her cup. Not the man, Hester said. His doings. A fella came through here 3 months back. Rancher, off east of the creek. Bitter as winter. Said Vance had run him off his ground. She frowned, remembering. Said the man filed papers on land that wasn't his. Filed under more than one name. Even said the county clerk let it slide because Vance buys the right men drinks. She looked at Naomi. You know anything about that? Naomi sat very still. She thought about the iron box. He keeps a strong box, she said slowly. Under the bed, locked. I was never to touch it. I thought it was the deed. Just our land. She set her cup down. But he went to the county seat, more than the ranch ever needed. And he never cared about the ranch itself. Ran it like it was something he was passing through. Like the point was always somewhere else. Could be just your land, Hester said. Could be more. Eli had been quiet. Now he leaned in. Who'd he run off? This rancher say. Just the one family. He named 2 or 3. Hester's mouth went thin. And there was talk, I don't know it, for fact talk, that one of the parcels Vance took belonged to a Crow family. Had it worked for years. Government paper said it was theirs. And then somehow it wasn't. And nobody in any office cared enough to ask how. Something cold went down Naomi's spine, because she remembered. A morning last fall, Silas in fine spirits for no reason she could see, signing papers at the kitchen table, telling her to fetch him coffee and not to read over his shoulder. And a man at the door later, not white hat in his hands, asking quiet and careful about land. And Silas sending him off the porch with words she'd been ashamed to hear come out of any mouth. She hadn't understood it then. She understood it now. It wasn't just stealing, she said, and her voice came out low. He took from people who couldn't fight back. He didn't pick men with money and lawyers. He picked a Crow family and a widow and folks too far from town to be heard. She looked up. He always picked the ones nobody would come running for, same as he picked me. The room was quiet. That's how it works, Eli said. His voice was even. But there was something hard under it now. Every man like Vance works the same way. He finds the person the world's already decided not to listen to. A woman, a poor man, a man whose skin the law was never written to protect. And then he does as he pleases, because he's figured the cost of being caught is near nothing who'd believe them over him. He shook his head. It's the oldest arithmetic there is. Power picks on whoever's been made quiet. And the only thing that ever breaks it is somebody refusing to stay quiet. Naomi looked at her wrapped arm, at her healing hands. I can read a ledger, she said. My father taught me. From 14 years old. I kept his books. I've watched Silas's 2 years now. I didn't always know what I was looking at, but I knew the numbers didn't sit right. Honest numbers sit one way. His sat another. Then those papers in that box, Hester said, in the right hands. They're not just your way out. They're 4 families' way home. Naomi stood up from the table. She walked to the window. Outside, the road ran east, back the way they'd come, back toward the cabin, and the bed, and the locked box under it. He won't come home last night or today, she said, thinking it through aloud. The accountant in her laying it out in columns. Coming home to an empty house means admitting I'm gone. And Silas doesn't admit things. He'll sleep at the saloon. He'll spend a day building the story he can live with. By tomorrow evening, he's back. And the first thing he does when he's back, she turned around, is check that box. And if there's any chance I know what's in it, he moves it where I'll never find it. So there's a window, Eli said. He looked at her. He didn't tell her what to do. He'd never once told her what to do. That's your choice to make, Naomi, not mine. Going back means riding toward the very thing you ran from. I'll not pretend it's safe, and I'll not push you to it. He paused. But if you decide to go, you won't go alone. That part I'll say plain. She looked at him, and at Hester, and at the gray window with the road running east under it. She thought about Cal Hadley's daughter, who'd shown her a secret as a girl. She thought about a Crow family she'd never met, run off land that was theirs, by a man who'd sworn before God to honor and provide. She thought about a widow, somewhere starting over with less than nothing. She thought about her own 2 years of careful pennies and swallowed words. She thought about how every single one of them had been chosen for the same reason, because somebody had decided they didn't count. They counted, she said, quiet to herself. Mostly every one of them counted. He's the only one who said they didn't, and he was wrong. And I've got the proof under his own bed. She turned to Eli. I'm going back, she said, not to stay, to get the box. He nodded once, like he'd known, and only waited for her to know it too. Then we'd best see to the horses, he said. Hester was already up, going for the trunk, pulling out a wrapped parcel of food and a clean roll of linen, pressing them into Naomi's good hand without a word, the way one woman arms another for a hard road. You bring those papers back here, Hester said, and then we'll get them to people who can do something with them. I've run this station 15 years. Child, I know more roads than the ones you ride on. Naomi took the parcel. Her hand closed around it. For the first time in a very long time, she wasn't running away from something. She was riding toward it, on purpose, by choice. And that she was beginning to understand made all the difference in the world. They rode east under a sky gone full of stars. Naomi navigated by them, and by the feel of ground, she knew the way you know your own house in the dark. Not seeing, knowing. The rise where the old fence sagged. The dip that flooded every April. Her body had the map, even when her eyes had nothing. Eli rode beside her and trusted where she pointed. He didn't check her. Didn't decide he knew the land better than the woman who'd lived on it. She thought about that as they rode. That kind of trust, offered without asking her to prove she'd earned it first. She'd forgotten a man could give a thing like that. They left the horses a quarter-mile out, tied down in a shallow draw where the road couldn't see them. Then they came in on foot from the north. Slow cabin, a black shape against a blacker land. No light, no smoke. He's not here, she breathed. Could be waiting in the dark. He wouldn't. She was sure of it. And she said why. Because the why mattered. Silas alone in the dark, with his own thoughts for company, that's the last thing he'd choose. He needs an audience. He needs to be telling somebody the story. He's at the saloon. I know him. She knew him. 2 years of knowing him in her bones. Every mood, every habit, every tell. It'd been a kind of prison. All that knowing. Now it was a tool. She turned it over in her hand and used it. They went in. The cabin was exactly as she'd left it the day she ran. The table she'd never set right. The cold stove. The particular stillness of a room where something bad had happened and might come back. She'd cooked 3,000 meals here. She'd bled on this floor. She'd counted to 60 on this floor, more times than she could add up. She felt almost nothing standing in it. That surprised her. She'd expected grief, or fear, or some pull of the old life. But it was like walking back into a building that had been burning so long the fire had stopped meaning anything. What she mostly felt was the direction of the door behind her, and the box ahead. She crossed to the bedroom without a lamp. She knew where the bed was. She knew the box was under it, against the right-hand wall. She got on her knees and reached, and her fingers found the cold iron corner, and she dragged it out into the open. She tried the lid. Locked, of course it was. He kept the key on his own body. He'd kept it on his body since the first week of the marriage, when she'd found the box and understood, all at once, what it meant that he locked a thing against his own wife, that there were parts of his life she would never be let into, that a key was just a small, hard way of saying you don't count enough to know. She'd never had the key. She'd never been going to have the key. Eli, she said. He was in the doorway. Yeah. Can you open a lock without a key? A pause. Depends on the lock. She heard him cross the room and crouch beside her in the dark. She heard his fingers move over the iron. Patient. Then a sound she didn't know, small. Metal. Careful. Then the box gave. He didn't ask what he'd done. He didn't make a thing of it. He just sat back on his heels and let her open it herself. She lifted the lid. She couldn't see what was inside. And she wasn't lighting a lamp. So she did the only thing that made sense. She set her bag open beside it, and she moved the contents over by feel. Every paper, every folded document, a small heavy pouch that chinked coin. She didn't stop to count it. All of it. She wasn't going to sort in the dark, and she wasn't going to leave a single sheet behind for him to use against her or anyone else. Her hands shook a little. She let them. She didn't have 60 seconds to spare, but she let them shake and kept working anyway. The fear plus the feet still moving. Hester's words. She moved. Done, she said. Then we go. She stood. She looked around the black room one last time, couldn't see it, but felt the shape of it. 2 years of her life. The walls that had held all of it. She'd thought she might say something to it. A goodbye. A curse, maybe. She didn't have anything to say. She went through the door. They were 100 yards from the horses when Eli stopped. Hold on, he said, quiet. She froze, listened, heard nothing but wind. What? He didn't answer right off. She heard him breathing slow, the way a man breathes when he's reading something in the dark. Then there's a lamp. She turned. Down at the cabin they'd just left. A window had gone yellow, faint. Somebody inside with a light. Her stomach dropped clean through the ground. He came home, she whispered. He came home, after all. Or somebody did. Eli's voice stayed even. That evenness was a thing she'd come to lean on. Panic was expensive. He'd told her once, without quite saying it. And he wasn't going to pay for it. Either way, we're out and they're in. And they don't know we were ever there. Let's keep it that way. They got to the horses. They mounted slow and quiet and walked them out of the draw before they ever asked for speed. But Naomi looked back once, and in the lamplit window, for just a second, she saw a shape move across the glass, broad through the shoulders, a way of standing she'd know anywhere. Silas home a full day before she'd figured. Wrong about him for the first time in 2 years. But underneath the scare, something else, because she had the box. She'd been wrong about when, but she'd been right about what. He'd come home, and the first place he'd look would be under that bed, and he'd find it empty, and he'd know. Let him know, she thought. Let him spend the night understanding that the woman he'd kept too small to count had walked into his own dark and taken the one thing he thought she'd never dare touch. They didn't read the papers that night. Eli wouldn't let her, and he was right about it, the way he kept being right. You've done about 14 things tonight. Most folks couldn't do in a week, he said as they rode, not stopping her, just making room. The papers'll still be in that bag. Come morning. They'll read easier in daylight, when you're not running on the last of your nerves. You're telling me to stop thinking. I'm telling you to let the rest of you rest. The thinking parts earned a night off. She almost laughed. It came out small and ragged, but it was real, and it surprised her, the shape of a laugh in her own mouth. In the middle of all this, her body insisting on it, claiming it back. That's reasonable, she said. I'm occasionally reasonable. They rode. After a while, she said, You barely know me. No, he said. But here's a thing I figured out a long time ago. Riding with people I didn't know. He looked at the dark road. You don't have to know the whole of a person to know which way they're pointed. I've watched which way you're pointed since I came up that road. You're pointed at standing up. That's enough to ride with. She held that. Then she said the thing she'd been turning over. He came home early. I was wrong about that. I'm not used to being wrong about him. I built my whole life on reading him right. Reading a man right kept you alive. Eli said, It's a hard skill, and you came by it the worst way. But Naomi, he paused, you don't have to keep reading him. That's the part you get to set down now. You spent 2 years studying one man so you could survive him. You don't owe that study to anybody anymore. You get to spend that head of yours on something you actually want. She looked at the stars, clear and cold and enormous, and she let herself think it, hers to look at. She thought about the box across her saddle, the 4 families inside it, the numbers she was going to read in the morning, in the light, with steady hands. She'd spent her whole mind, 2 years, on the small problem of one man's moods. It would be a strange thing, she thought, to find out what that mind could do, turned loose on something worth the work. She read them at dawn, before either man was up. She hadn't slept. She'd lain in the back room at Mercy Station, listening to her own breathing and thinking in columns, until the wanting to see got bigger than the wanting to rest. So she lit the lamp herself. She sat at Hester's long table, and she went through every page the way her father had taught her, back when she was 14, and he'd handed her his farm ledgers and said, You've got the clearest head in this family, girl. Lord help us. The first paper was a land claim under the name Silas Vance. The second was a claim under the name Saul Vincent, a man she'd never heard of. The hand it was written in was Silas's own. She sat with that a moment. Then she kept going. The third was a deed. The Hadley land, Cal Hadley's ground. The land with the dry creek, and the secret way she'd run through as a girl sold to Saul Vincent 18 months back, for 1/5 of its worth, witnessed by 2 names she knew from the saloon. Nobody sold their home for 1/5 of its worth by choice. Cal Hadley hadn't left Montana because he was old and tired, the way folks had said, the way she'd believed. Cal Hadley had been pushed, and she'd run across his dark and never known whose grief she was running through. Her coffee went cold beside her, untouched, by the time Eli came to the doorway. She had 6 documents laid out in order, a 7th in her hand, and 3 lines of Hester's brown paper filled with her own neat figures numbers that crossed and confirmed each other with the awful tidiness of a ledger that doesn't know it's confessing. How bad, Eli said. 4 families. She didn't look up. 4 years. The Hadley place, a tract east of town that belonged to a widow named Eckert. 2 parcels along the creek that were a family called Doyle's. They went to Colorado 3 years back, and now I know why. And she set down the 7th page. Careful, like it might burn a quarter section that the paper says belonged to a Crow family. Worked it 12 years. Had government title to it. He filed over the top of it under the Vincent name and bribed the clerk to let it pass. And there was nobody at any desk in this territory who cared enough to ask how a family loses land they hold paper on. Eli came and stood beside her and looked without touching. You're sure of the reading? I'm sure. She tapped the brown paper. The numbers don't lie even when the man does. He paid the clerk in 3 installments. It's right here, in his own book, listed as filing costs. Filing costs don't come in 3 even payments to the same initials. Bribes do. She looked up at him. I watched him do 2 of the 3 things he did to the Doyles. I didn't understand them at the time. I understand them now. I can testify to them, to what I saw with my own eyes. At least, whatever the law'll let a wife say. Hester came from the back, took one look at the table, poured herself coffee, and sat at the far end without being asked. 15 years of running a way station had taught her when a conversation wanted a witness. There's a circuit judge due through Casper in 3 weeks, Hester said. Harriman. Honest man rarer than it ought to be. And there's a clerk works the circuit ahead of him. Woman by the name of Vesper Cole. Discreet as a stone. The kind of woman who's made a whole career of knowing exactly what she can and can't do, and doing the can part thoroughly. She looked at Naomi. Information like this has a way of finding the right people through her, without your name needing to be on anything official till you choose to put it there. Naomi looked at the documents, at the 4 families spread across the table in Silas's own hand. He hits me and I run, she said slowly, working it out loud. The way she did when a thing was too big to hold all at once. And he spends a year telling everyone I'm unstable, dishonest, left without cause. And folks believe him, because I'm a woman and he's a man with friends. And that's the whole of it. She paused. But these papers don't care that I'm a woman. These papers make him a criminal. And a criminal has problems bigger than a wife who left. That's exactly it, Eli said. And here's the thing worth seeing. Naomi. He sat down across from her. You've got the word of one woman against a man with money. That's the fight he's built his whole life to win. Because the world set the table in his favor before either of you sat down at it. He laid a hand flat on the documents. But you're not on your own. There's 4 families here he wronged. 3 of them with men and titles. And standing the law was written to here. You put your truth in a room with theirs. And all of a sudden, it's not one small woman against a big man. It's a whole row of people he decided didn't count, all counting at once. He looked at her steady. That's how it always breaks. In the end. Enough of them, that they can't all be ignored. Naomi sat with that. I always thought I had to get free by myself, she said. Quiet. Small. Slip out and disappear, and never be looked for. You can do it that way, Hester said. Plenty have. Nothing shameful in it. She sipped her coffee. But you've got a choice in front of you most women in your spot never get. You can save just yourself. Or you can save yourself and pull 4 other families up out of the ditch, behind you on the same rope. She set the cup down. I won't tell you which. That's yours. But I'll tell you the second one's harder and worth more. And I've never once met a soul who regretted it. Naomi looked down at her hands, at the wrap on her arm, at the ink on her fingers from a night of writing numbers in the dark. She thought about a Crow family she'd never met. Run-off land that was theirs, by a man who'd sworn to honor her and provide. She thought about the widow Eckert, the Doyles in Colorado, Cal Hadley's daughter who'd shown her a secret as a child, never knowing it'd be the path her friend took to freedom one day. Every single one of them chosen for the same reason. because somebody decided they were too small, too far, too quiet to count. She'd been chosen for that. 2. I was always this person, she said. The words came out flat and plain and certain. The truest thing she'd said in 2 years. He just required me to be smaller for a while. She looked up. I'm done being smaller. And I'm not walking away from 4 families to save myself a hard road. That's not the kind of free I want. Eli looked at her a long moment. The not-quite smile she was learning to read moved at the corner of his mouth. Then we'd best get word to Vesper Cole, he said. Naomi gathered the papers into order, with her steady, ink-stained hands. Yes, she said. We had Casper was noise and horses, and the smell of a bigger world. Naomi stepped off the stage and planted her boots on the main street and felt the town come up through her soles. Loud, strange. A place where nobody knew her name, and nobody knew Silas's. The anonymity of it wasn't lonely. It was enormous and clean, like air after a long time in a closed room. Vesper Cole was waiting, and she was not what Naomi had built in her mind. Naomi had pictured someone small and careful, working in margins. What she got was a woman of 50 with iron-gray hair and a level gaze and the unhurried authority of a person who'd been the most capable one in most rooms for a long time and made her peace with the fact that most of those rooms would never say so. Mrs. Vance, Vesper said. Hartley, Naomi said. My name is Hartley. It was my mother's. Vesper's expression shifted. Not surprise. Something more like satisfaction. The look of a woman who'd heard that particular correction before and counted it a good sign. Miss Hartley, she said, Edgar tells me you have documents. I do. Then come inside and bring that lawyer I'm about to send you to. The lawyer was a man named Reuben Garrett, black, 50-some, spectacled, with the impatience of a man who found most conversations too slow. He went through Naomi's papers in 40 minutes flat, asked her 11 questions in a row, and then sat back and looked at her with something she hadn't expected. Not the courtesy kind men hand a woman because manners require it. The real kind. The kind that comes from the quality of what she'd laid on his table. You ordered these, he said, numbered them. Cross-referenced your notes in the margins. I did that before dawn. You've got a head for accounts. My father's books. From 14. And Silas's. For 2 years. Garrett looked at the documents. Then at her. Then at the brown paper, full of her figures. Miss Hartley, I'll be plain with you, because plain is the only thing I've got time for. This is a serious case. It is not a complicated one. The fraud isn't clever, but it is wide. And documentation you've recovered is the cleanest I've seen in 8 years of this work. He took off his spectacles. It will also be hard on you personally, if it comes to your testimony. Vance's man will go at your character, your conduct as a wife. Whether you're lying for spite, it will not be clean. Mr. Garrett, she kept her hands still on the table. I spent 2 years in a cabin 2 miles from the nearest soul, learning to live inside a thing that wasn't clean. I am very comfortable with not clean. What I'm not comfortable with is walking away from 4 families because the road's hard. He looked at her a moment. Then he put his spectacles back on. I'll take your case, he said. Fee contingent on the land fraud outcome. You owe me nothing until Vance owes the court something. He paused. That's not my standard arrangement. I want that understood. Why then? Because there's a kind of person this territory was built to ignore. He squared the papers. A woman, a poor man, a man with my color of skin. The whole machine runs on the bet that we'll stay quiet. Because who'd believe us over a man like Vance? I've spent my life proving that bet wrong. One case at a time. He looked at her over the glasses. You walked into my office having already done half the work of proving it. I'd be a poor sort of man to charge you for the privilege of finishing it. Silas came to Casper on the fourth day. She knew before she saw him some animal register that had tuned to him over 2 years, a tightening across the shoulders. She came out of Garrett's office, and there he was, far down the street, charming a man outside the land office, building his version of things, the way he always did. He hadn't seen her. She stood still and took stock, 4 days ago, on a road, with her arm in his fist. The sight of him would have folded her whole body into itself. She'd have counted exits, run the old arithmetic of a woman navigating around a man, the way water goes around a stone, endless, exhausting, no end point ever. She felt none of it. What she felt was clarity, flat and clean. The feeling of standing on ground you know is solid. She didn't hide, but she didn't rush him either. She'd learned the difference between brave and foolish in a barn cellar in the dark. She turned and went back in and told Garrett, and the wheels kept turning, the way wheels do once they're set. He found her 2 days after that, outside the dry goods store. The sixth day. Abigail, he said, and then caught himself, because that wasn't even her name. He'd never once used the real one, Naomi. She turned around, because turning around was a thing she chose, not because his voice pulled her. From a decision she made in the half-second between her name and her answer. He looked smaller, not in size. Silas was still a big man, but something in him had contracted. She could see it now from the outside. The thing she'd never seen while she was in it. The particular smallness of a man whose bigness had always depended on the smallness of the people around him. Take away the frightened wife, the isolated cabin, the audience of men who owed him, and what was left just wasn't very large. You need to come home, he said. No, he blinked. The word landed on him wrong. He'd never heard it land like that. She watched him reach for the version of her he knew how to handle, and not find her there. After everything you've done, taking my property, running off with a stranger, making a spectacle, Silas. She said his name once, plain, the way Eli said hers, like it was the right word for a real thing. Not a weapon and not a plea. I have a lawyer, Reuben Garrett. 2 streets that way. I have the papers from your strongbox. And in 2 days, there's a hearing before Judge Harriman about land claims filed in this county over the last 4 years. She watched the charm go out of his face. Not slow, all at once, like a lamp when you turn the key. What was underneath was the thing she'd seen only a few times in 2 years, the look of a man who'd run out of story and not yet built the next. You don't know what I know, exactly what I'm doing. Her voice didn't rise. Her feet didn't move. I've known what I was doing since I was 14, and my father handed me his books. I was always going to be this person. Silas, you just needed me to be smaller for a while, so you could be bigger than you actually are. He looked at the street around her, the people passing, the plain public daylight of it. He looked for the door. She'd always left him the apology, the retreat, the soft thing she'd learned to do to keep him from going further. He didn't find it. There wasn't one anymore. This isn't finished, he said, cold now, past anger, into something flatter. You're right, she said. It isn't. The court will finish it. She turned and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't hurry. She walked at her own pace down the middle of the street, chin level, and she did not look back to see his face. She didn't need to know which way he was pointed anymore. She'd set that study down. It was the night before the hearing that things went wrong. Naomi should have seen it. She'd built her whole survival on seeing things coming. But she'd been so fixed on Celis, on the courtroom, the documents, the careful machine she and Garrett had set running that she'd stopped watching the edges. And the trouble didn't come from Silas at all. It came from the man behind him. Cyrus Beaumont was a name she'd found in the papers 3 times and never thought hard about. A partner, a signature, the man Silas owed. She'd worked out the one whose money sat under half the fraud, who'd taken his cut quiet and let Silas's name be the one on top. She'd filed him away as a footnote. He was no footnote. He came for her in the dark, outside the boarding house. 2 men with him. She had time to shout once, before a hand closed over her mouth. And then she was in the back of a wagon with her own bag. The bag. The papers clutched against her by some reflex she'd never lose. "Quiet, Mrs. Vance," Beaumont said. He was a lean, neat man with a soft voice. And somehow the softness was worse than any shout she'd ever heard from Silas. "You and I are going to have a conversation about paper, about what gets burned tonight, and what doesn't, and then about whether you walk into that courthouse tomorrow or whether you're simply never seen in Casper again. Both are fine with me. I'd like you to help me choose." She didn't scream again. Screaming was spending what she didn't have. She made herself breathe, the fear plus the feet still moving. She had no feet right now, so she used the only thing she did have, her head. She talked. She kept him talking. She asked questions a frightened woman would ask, and she counted the turns of the wagon. And she felt for the seam in the bag where the papers were. And she thought, Eli knows my habits now. Eli watches edges. Eli will have heard one shout and known. She was right. He came out of the dark the way he'd come up that first road, unhurried, right up until he wasn't. The wagon had stopped at a shack outside town. Beaumont's 2 men were pulling her down when the first one folded with a sound and didn't get up, and the second turned. And Eli was already there. But Beaumont had a gun, and he put it to Naomi's head. "Marshal," Beaumont said he'd done his reading too. "I'd hold real still." Everybody held still. And here was the thing Naomi would remember after. Eli didn't rush it. Even now, even with a gun against her skull, he didn't do the loud thing, the desperate thing, the thing that gets people killed. He stood with his own gun down and his eyes steady, and he talked, low and flat, the way he'd talked to Silas in the yard a lifetime ago. "You shoot her," Eli said, "and the only thing you've done is hang yourself for nothing. The papers are already copied. Garrett has them. Cole has them. Harriman's read them. Killing her doesn't unburn 1 page of it. All it does is turn land fraud into murder and trade 10 years in a cell for a rope." He took a slow breath. "You're a businessman. Beaumont, I've watched men like you my whole life. You don't kill when the math says don't, and the math says don't." She felt the gun waver against her hair. In that wavering, Naomi did her part. She'd been working the seam of the bag the whole time, and now she did the one thing nobody watches a frightened woman, for she went limp, all at once, dropping straight down out of Beaumont's grip toward the dirt. And Eli moved. The shot went over her. She heard it crack the air where her head had been. Then she was on the ground, and there was a scuffle above her, short and ugly and final. And when she got her eyes up, Beaumont was face down with Eli's knee in his back, and the gun spun off into the dark. It was right then that Silas came around the side of the shack. He'd followed Beaumont. Of course he had to plead, or to bargain, or just because the story had finally gotten away from him, and he didn't know what else to do. He had a gun, too, and his hand was shaking, and his eyes were wild in a way Naomi had never seen. The way of a man watching everything he built come apart at once. Silas, Eli said, still on Beaumont's back. Still even. Put it down. It's over. Don't make it worse than it is. And Eli had a clear shot. Naomi saw it. His own pistol was in reach. Silas was lit by the wagon lantern. And a faster judgment than the laws would have ended it right there. He didn't take it. Listen to me, Eli said, and he wasn't talking to Silas now. Not only he was saying it for her, for the dark, for whatever in him had been waiting years to say it. Killing him is the easy thing. I could do it and call it justice, and half this territory would shake my hand. But that's not justice. That's just me, deciding I get to be his judge because I'm faster with a gun. And that's the exact same arithmetic he lived by that the strong get to decide, and the weak just take it. He kept his eyes on Silas. The difference between us is I'd rather let him face a court than make myself one. That's the whole difference. That's the only difference that's ever mattered. It wasn't Eli who fired. It was Beaumont pinned, desperate, getting one hand to the spare piece in his boot, firing blind from the dirt. The shot caught Silas square. Silas looked surprised more than anything. Then he sat down against the shack wall, slow, and didn't get up, dead by the hand of the man stronger than he was, the one he'd bowed to. Naomi watched it and felt the cold logic of it settle in her chest. That was how it always ended for men who lived by who was bigger. Sooner or later, they met someone bigger still. Eli had Beaumont disarmed and trussed before the echo died. He came to Naomi then, knelt, didn't grab her, gave her the room. Even now, you hurt. No, her voice shook. She let it. No, I went limp. You said once the math. So I changed the math. Something moved through his face. Not quite a smile. More than one. You did, he said. You surely did. The hearing took 3 hours. Judge Harriman was 70 and had the patience of a mammon who'd heard every version of every story and stopped being surprised by any of it years ago. He listened to Reuben Garrett lay out the documents. He listened to Naomi answer 4 questions, plain and without decoration. He heard the affidavit from the Doyles, read in by a Denver lawyer, and the testimony of a man who'd ridden 3 days from the Crow Agency, hat in his hands, to say in careful English what had been taken and how. Silas's estate had a lawyer too, since Silas himself was in the ground. The lawyer argued spousal spite and a wife's compromised motive and all the old furniture. Harriman listened to that with the same flat attention he'd given everything else. Then he called a recess and came back and spoke for 12 minutes in the dry, exact language of a court record. The land claims filed under the name Saul Vincent were void. The Hadley land, the Eckert tract, the Doyle parcels, and the Crow family's quarter section were placed in receivership pending restitution. Cyrus Beaumont was bound over on charges of fraud, kidnapping, and the murder of Silas Vance. And Naomi Hartley Harriman used that name, the one she'd given. The one on Garrett's filings was recognized as a non-liable party in all of it, and granted full separation of property. She sat in the courtroom and heard it and felt it settle, not with drama, not with the flood of relief she might once have expected, with the slow, solid weight of ground that had always been there, only now being named as ground. Eli sat beside her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He sat there with the same steadiness he'd had on a road 8 days back. And she felt it the same way. She'd felt it then, not as something she leaned on, but as something that stood beside her, parallel, matching her pace. That was the thing she'd been trying to name since the porch, since the coffee, since the cellar in the dark. He didn't walk ahead of her, and he didn't walk behind. He walked beside her, at her speed, toward whatever she was heading for. The Crow family's representative found her on the courthouse steps after. He was an older man, and he looked at her a long moment before he spoke. "You didn't have to bring our land into it," he said. "Ours was a harder fight to add. Most folks would have left it out. It was never just my case," Naomi said. "He picked every one of us for the same reason. Said we didn't count. Putting your land back is the same thing as standing up for myself. It's the same sentence. I couldn't say half of it." The man nodded slow. "My daughter will hear about you," he said. "She'll want to know your name." "Hartley," Naomi said. "Naomi Hartley." She didn't marry Eli that season. Folks expected it, and were a little disappointed, the way folks are. But she'd spent 2 years being told who she was and what things meant by a man who lied. The last thing she was going to do was rush into being defined again, even by something good, even by him. And Eli understood it before she said a word. He didn't push. Pushing wasn't in him. She took a room in Casper, and then a small storefront, and she opened an apothecary. Her mother's recipes, her own healing hands, the ones Hester had told her not to waste. Women came who couldn't go to the doctor, or wouldn't, for reasons they didn't say, and she didn't ask. She wrapped their arms tight in the right places. She gave them what they needed and the room to take it. And sometimes, when one of them stood in her shop with that particular stillness, that holding still she knew from the inside, Naomi would say the thing plainest of all, the thing nobody had said to her for 2 years until two strangers in a warm room finally did. "You count," she'd say. "Whatever he told you, whatever the law told you, you were a person before you were anybody's wife, and you'll be one after. That part of you, nobody signed away. Nobody ever could." Some of them believed her right off. She'd been most of them once. So she said it again the next time, and the time after, the way you say a true thing until it's heard. Because she'd learned that freedom isn't one grand moment in a courtroom. It's a sentence somebody says to you when you've stopped believing it, and then says again, until you can say it back. Eli walked her home from the shop most evenings. Beside her, never ahead. One night near winter, Hester sent a packet down with the stage. Inside was an old letter, soft at the folds from years of handling. Eli read it on Naomi's step in the lamplight and went very still. "It's from my sister," he said finally. His voice wasn't quite steady. "She wrote it before she gave it to Hester to keep, back when Hester nursed in that county. Hester held it, 20 years not knowing where to send it. He folded it careful. She wrote that she wasn't sorry she'd tried to get free, that trying was the bravest thing she ever did. Even if it didn't, he stopped. She wanted whoever read it to know that." Naomi put her hand over his. "You couldn't save her," she said, gentle. "True, but you stopped on a road for a woman you'd never met, because of her. You went down the road you didn't go down the first time." She looked at him. "That's not nothing. That's the only thing that ever turns a grief into something worth carrying." He turned his hand over under hers and held it. Light, more information than grip. The way he'd held her arm in the dark of a cellar a lifetime ago, tracking which one was hurt. Above them the stars came out, clear and cold and enormous, and hers to look at. A woman who'd been made small for 2 years had remembered how much space she actually took up, and she did not apologize for it anymore. To anyone. Ever. Freedom, she understood now, was not a gift a man handed you. Not even a good man. It was the ground you stood up on, by your own choice, on your own feet, and then turned around and offered your hand to the next person, still down in the dirt, not to pull them up, just to stand beside them. while they did it themselves. The opinions, actions, and decisions expressed by the characters in this story do not reflect the views or beliefs of the author. Certain scenes may contain dramatic situations, emotional conflict, or morally complex behavior intended solely to serve the fictional storyline and enhance the audience's viewing experience.
And so, as the dust settles over Redemption Creek and the last light fades beyond the wide Montana sky, this story leaves us with more than the memory of a woman escaping a cruel man. It leaves us with the image of Naomi Hartley, standing on her own 2 feet, no longer asking permission to exist, no longer shrinking herself so another person could feel tall. In many Western tales, freedom is shown as a horse running across an open plain, a gunfight won at sundown, or a rider disappearing into the horizon. But Naomi's freedom is quieter than that, and maybe stronger. Her freedom begins with a simple truth. She was always a person before anyone tried to make her property, before the law failed her, before fear trained her to count her breaths and measure every word. Silas Vance believed power meant making others small. He believed that if he could isolate Naomi, silence poor families, cheat a widow, and steal from people the world already ignored, then his lies would become truth. But the story reminds us that truth has a way of waiting. It waits in ledgers, in wounds, in memories, in the courage of people who have been told too many times that their voice does not matter. And when those voices finally join together, even the strongest lie begins to crack. Eli Calhoun's role in this story is not to rescue Naomi like a prize from danger. His real strength is that he knows how to stand beside her without taking her choices away. He gives her space to rise. He trusts her knowledge of the land. He respects her mind, her fear, her timing, and her right to decide what kind of freedom she wants. That is one of the deepest lessons this story offers. Love, honor, and justice are not proven by control. They are proven by respect. A good person does not pull someone up just to feel like a hero. A good person stands close enough to help, far enough to respect, and steady enough to remind the wounded that they still have strength of their own. Naomi's journey also teaches us that bravery does not always look like fearlessness. Sometimes bravery is a woman running out the door with no plan except not anymore. Sometimes it is returning to the very house that broke you, not to stay, but to take back the proof, the truth, and the power that were hidden beneath your bed. Sometimes bravery is speaking in a courtroom while people try to shame you. Sometimes it is opening a shop, healing others, and saying to the next frightened soul, "You count." That may be the greatest victory of all. Naomi does not end the story by becoming someone else's shadow. She becomes a light for others. She turns her pain into shelter, her knowledge into justice, and her healing hands into a promise that what happened to her will not be the end of her, nor the measure of her worth. For the audience, this story carries a timeless message. The law may be slow, society may be unfair, and the powerful may seem untouchable, but right and wrong are not decided by who speaks the loudest or who owns the most land. Justice begins when someone refuses to look away. It grows when one person's courage gives another person permission to stand, and it becomes unstoppable when the forgotten, the silenced, and the wounded finally realize they were never small at all. In the end, Naomi's story is not just about surviving abuse, escaping a marriage, or exposing a criminal. It is about reclaiming the sacred ground of the self. It is about remembering that dignity is not given by a husband, a judge, a town, or even a hero on horseback. Dignity is something already inside us, waiting to be believed again. Freedom is not a gift handed down by someone stronger. Freedom is the moment you plant your feet, lift your head, and choose your own name, your own road, your own future. And once you have found that ground, the most meaningful thing you can do is turn around, not to drag the next person forward, not to command them, not to own their story, but simply to stand beside them until they remember they can rise too. That is the heart of this tale. That is the dust it leaves on our boots and the fire it leaves in our chest. No one is too broken to stand again. No voice is too small to matter. And no darkness is so deep that one brave step toward the truth cannot begin to change everything.